In June 2007, the WWE did something it had never done before and has never done since. It erased a human being, not just from its programming, from its website, from its merchandise, from its Hall of Fame considerations, from its historical records, from every video package, every highlight reel, every mention in any official capacity, as if Chris Benoit had never existed. But he did exist. For 22 years, he was one of the most technically gifted wrestlers the sport had ever produced. A man who gave everything he had to his craft, every night, in every city, in every country. And the question that the WWE will never answer officially, the question that thousands of fans still ask today, is this: can you separate the wrestler from the man? This is the story of Chris Benoit, the career WWE doesn't want you to remember, and the tragedy that made it impossible to forget.
Masked Glory.
Christopher Michael Benoit was born on May 21, 1967, in Montreal, Canada. He grew up watching wrestling on television the way other kids watched cartoons. But unlike most kids, he didn't just want to watch it. He wanted to be the best who ever did it. At 14 years old, he wrote a letter to Stu Hart, the legendary patriarch of Canadian wrestling, asking for a tryout at the famous Hart Dungeon in Calgary. The Hart Dungeon was not a school in any comfortable sense of the word. It was a basement where some of the toughest men in the sport were pushed to their absolute limits every single day. Benoit walked in as a teenager and never looked back. He trained alongside future legends. He absorbed everything. And from his earliest days, it was clear that he had something rare. Not just athleticism, not just technique, an almost obsessive commitment to being perfect inside the ring. That obsession would define his entire career, and it would cost him everything. Benoit spent his early career doing what very few wrestlers of his generation had the courage to do. He went to Japan. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Japanese professional wrestling, known as puroresu, was widely considered the most technically demanding wrestling in the world. The matches were longer, stiffer, and more physically brutal than anything happening in North America at the time. Benoit didn't just survive in Japan, he thrived. He learned a style of wrestling that was completely different from what North American audiences were used to. Precise, hard-hitting, built on respect for the craft above everything else. When he returned to North America, he brought that style with him, and it made him stand out immediately. In WCW, he became one of the most respected performers on the roster, despite never being given the main event push his talent deserved. The politics of professional wrestling have always favored the larger, more physically imposing performer. Benoit stood at 5 feet 10 inches and was routinely overlooked for the top spots despite delivering matches that his peers considered masterclasses. His rivalry with Dean Malenko, his wars with Diamond Dallas Page, his matches against Booker T, each one a technical exhibition that the hardcore wrestling audience recognized as something special even when the company's booking didn't reflect that. Then came 2004, and the night that defined his legacy. Wrestlemania 20, Madison Square Garden, New York City. Chris Benoit entered the Royal Rumble from the #1 position, lasted over an hour, and won the right to challenge for the World Heavyweight Championship at Wrestlemania. What happened that night at Madison Square Garden is still considered one of the most emotionally powerful moments in WrestleMania history. Benoit made Triple H tap out in the middle of the ring. His best friend, Eddie Guerrero, the other champion that night, ran out to celebrate with him. Two men, both considered too small, both told for years they would never be the top of the card. both holding championships at the same time in the most famous arena in the world. Benoit sat in the middle of the ring and cried. The crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. It was the peak of his career, the moment everything he had worked for since that letter to Stu Hart finally made sense. 3 years later, everything collapsed. In June 2007, Chris Benoit murdered his wife Nancy and his 7-year-old son Daniel before taking his own life. There is no cinematic way to say that. There is no narrative frame that softens it. It happened. It was real. And nothing about his career or his talent changes what he did. What the medical examination of his brain revealed afterward added a layer of context that the wrestling industry has never fully confronted. His brain showed severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma. His brain, according to the doctors who examined it, resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. That is not an excuse. It is not a justification. But it is a fact that the sport has a responsibility to reckon with. Within 24 hours of the news breaking, the WWE removed Chris Benoit from its website. Within weeks, his matches were pulled from DVD releases. His name was removed from historical records. Wrestlers who had been his closest friends were instructed not to mention him publicly. The WWE made a business decision, and from a purely legal and reputational standpoint, it was understandable. But the erasure created something the WWE didn't anticipate. It made Chris Benoit more present than he would have been if they had simply addressed it directly. Because when you erase something completely, you guarantee that people will spend the next 2 decades searching for what was removed. Every wrestling fan who discovers the sport eventually asks the same question. Who was Chris Benoit? Why does nobody talk about him? Why can't I find him anywhere on the official channels? And the answers to those questions lead them down a path that the WWE would prefer they never took. Chris Benoit's legacy is one of the most uncomfortable conversations in the history of professional wrestling, because the wrestling was real, the matches were real, the dedication was real, the tears at Wrestlemania 20 were real, and the tragedy was also real. The wrestlers who trained under him remember a man who was generous with his knowledge and relentless in his pursuit of excellence. The fans who watched him remember matches that still hold up as technical masterpieces 20 years later. None of that erases what he did, and what he did doesn't erase 22 years of a career that influenced an entire generation of professional wrestlers. Daniel Bryan, CM Punk, Samoa Joe, Seth Rollins. Every technical wrestler who came after Benoit carries some trace of his influence in the way they work inside the ring. The WWE erased his name, but you cannot erase an influence that has already been absorbed into the DNA of the sport itself. Chris Benoit existed. He was extraordinary inside the ring. He committed an unforgivable act outside of it. And the wrestling industry is still, nearly 2 decades later, trying to figure out what to do with both of those truths at the same time. That discomfort is not going away, and pretending he never existed has not made it any easier to process.